Mike. How do you slip in here past me? just feel free to move forward. There's lots of room in the front. I know, some of you got here early just so you could sit in the back. But there's room up front, too. We start on page 2.
We're fighting for our freedom, we shall not be moved. We're fighting for our freedom, we shall not be moved. Just like a tree that's planted by the river, we shall not be moved. We shall not be moved. We shall not be moved. Just like a tree that's planted by the river, we shall not be moved. We're fighting for our children, we shall not be moved. We're fighting for our children, we shall not be moved. Just like a tree that's planted by the river, we shall not be moved. We shall not be moved. We shall not be moved. Just like a tree that's planted by the river, we shall not be moved. Black and white together, we shall not be moved. Black and white together, we shall not be moved. Just like a tree that's planted by the river, we shall not be moved. We shall not be moved. We shall not be moved. Just like a tree that's planted by the river, we shall not be moved. Young and old together, we shall not be moved. Young and old together, we shall not be moved. Just like a tree that's planted by the river, we shall not be moved. We shall not be moved. We shall not be moved. Just like a tree that's planted by the river, we shall not be moved. Just like a tree that's planted by the river, we shall not be moved.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
It is wonderful to be together tonight for this special service for this Shabbat. Whether you are here in the room or joining us on YouTube, we are glad that you are here. As we honor the life and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., we will be extensively using our special supplemental booklet in addition to the Siddur. So if you are on YouTube, you may want to get the PDF that contains all of the prayers that we'll be saying tonight. You should see the link to the PDF on your YouTube screen. So if you don't yet have it open, you might want to go ahead and click on that. As we begin, I particularly want to greet some special guests tonight. In addition to our special guest speaker, Rabbi Tiferet Birnbaum, who we'll say more about later, we are delighted to welcome Reverend Alicia Johnson and Deacon Margaret Howard and some of their congregants from Messiah Baptist Church in Brockton. Messiah Baptist had a long-standing relationship with Temple Beth Emunah, and we here at Temple Chai Shalom are really looking forward to strengthening the relationship between our congregations. So we're really delighted to have you here tonight. So welcome to you all. We are also honored to have with us State Representative Carol Doherty. It's a pleasure to welcome you back here as well, and to be able, for all of us, to join together in our celebration of Shabbat tonight. This week, the Torah portion that Jews around the world read tells us of God sending Moses and Aaron to Pharaoh to demand that he liberate the enslaved Israelites. When Pharaoh refuses, God sends terrible plagues on Egypt, an unfortunately necessary step to ensure the release of the captive people. Indeed, in this week's portion, to quote our opening song, we are fighting for our freedom. Freedom is an important component of Shabbat every week. Only free people are able to take a day of rest, a day of reflection, and a day of renewal. And so we are told, for example, in the Kiddush, the sanctification blessing that we will say later over the grape juice, that Shabbat is Zecher L'Tziat Mitzrayim, a reminder of the exodus from Egypt, bringing us into freedom. This Exodus narrative, the story of our people's journey from oppression to liberation, deeply inspired Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement. So our service tonight, as always, is particularly well-timed. We greet each other with Shabbat Shalom, the wish for a Shabbat peace. While I'm confident that here at least our time tonight will be peaceful, bringing peace to the world beyond these walls requires much greater effort. In his lecture upon winning the Nobel Peace Prize in 1964, Martin Luther King reflected on the challenge of creating a universal peace. It's on page 2 of your booklets at the bottom. Reading number 1. We will not build a peaceful world by following a negative path. It is not enough to say we must not wage war. It is necessary to love peace and sacrifice for it. We must concentrate not merely on the negative expulsion of war, but on the positive affirmation of peace. We must see that peace represents a sweeter music, a cosmic melody that is far superior to the discords of war. Somehow we must transform the dynamics of the world power struggle from the negative nuclear arms race, which no one can win, to a positive contest to harness man's creative genius for the purpose of making peace and prosperity a reality for all of the nations of the world. In short, we must shift the arms race into a peace race. If we have the will and determination to mount such a peace offensive, we will unlock hitherto tightly sealed doors of hope and transform our imminent cosmic elegy into a psalm of creative fulfillment. Not only do we greet each other with this wish for peace, but Jewish tradition imagines that on Shabbat we are each accompanied by angelic messengers from God. We welcome them in peace and hope that peace will be their blessing for us. On page 13 of our books, Shalom Aleichem.
Shalom Aleichem, Malachei Hasharei, Malachei Elyon. Melech Malchei Amlakim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Koachem l'shalom.
Ordinarily, we begin our Shabbat services by lighting the Shabbat candles. Tonight, though, we had our Tat Shabbat celebration earlier in the evening, so the candles are already lit. Nevertheless, we continue on page 3 of the booklets, This Little Light of Mine.
This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Each and every day, I'm gonna let it shine. Each and every day, I'm gonna let it shine. Each and every day, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. All around the world, I'm gonna let it shine. All around the world, I'm gonna let it shine. All around the world, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Orza Ruah, Latzadi. Orza Ruah, Latzadi. Orza Ruah, Latzadi. Ul Yisrael Simcha. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine.
In the books, page 21, we welcome the Shabbat bride, Lecha Dodi.
Lecha Dodi, Likrat Kala. Lecha Dodi, Likrat Kala. Lecha Dodi, Likrat Kala. B'nei Shabbat Nekavila. Shamor v'zachor b'diburecha. Ishmi'anu el ha'miyuchad. Adonai echad u'shemo echad. L'shem u'tiferet v'mitila. Lecha Dodi, Likrat Kala. Lecha Dodi, Likrat Kala. Lecha Dodi, Likrat Kala. B'nei Shabbat Nekavila. Likrat Shabbat lechu v'nelcha. Yihi v'kor ha'beraka. Merosh migedem nesucha. Sof ma'aseh b'machshava techila. Lecha Dodi, Likrat Kala. Lecha Dodi, Likrat Kala. Lecha Dodi, Likrat Kala. B'nei Shabbat Nekavila. Hitoreri, hitoreri. Shiva orech, kumi ori. Uri, uri. Shir dameri, kevod Rakala, Lechadodi, Likrakala, B'nei Shabbat, Nekabela, Ro'i v'shalom, Ateret Bala, Gam b'simcha, U'betzola, Toch emunei, Am segula, Bo'i chala, Bo'i chala. Lechadodi, Likrakala, Lechadodi, Likrakala, Lechadodi, Likrakala, B'nei Shabbat, Nekabela.
We stay standing on page 28, Baruch Hu.
Baruch hu et Adonai HaMevorach. Baruch Adonai HaMevorach le'olam va'ed.
Please be seated. As we begin this section of the service called Shema and its blessings, and we move toward affirming the unity of God, the next prayer praises God as creator of this universe and this beautiful planet we inhabit. In 1963, when Martin Luther King spoke at the March on Washington, he called for the unity and equality of humanity under God, using images of the natural wonders of this country to dramatize that vision. He said these famous words on page 4, reading number 2. I say to you today, my friends, even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream that one day, right there in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. So let freedom ring from the prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire. Let freedom ring from the mighty mountains of New York. Let freedom ring from the heightening Alleghenies of Pennsylvania. Let freedom ring from the snow-capped Rockies of Colorado. Let freedom ring from the curvaceous slopes of California. But not only that, let freedom ring from Stone Mountain of Georgia. Let freedom ring from Lookout Mountain of Tennessee. Let freedom ring from every hill and molehill of Mississippi, from every mountainside. Let freedom ring. That grateful hope for freedom in this beautiful universe moves us to give thanks for God's love as expressed through God's gift of Torah. In the Siddur on page 29, Ahavat Olam.
Ahavat Olam, Beit Yisrael, Amka Ahavta, Torah u'mitzvot, Chukim u'mishpatim, Otanu Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed. Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha bechol levacha ubechol nafshecha ubechol me'odecha. Ve'hayu hadvarim ha'ele asher anochi mitzavecha hayom al levavecha. V'shinantam levanecha v'dibarta bam v'shivtecha b'veitecha uvlechtecha v'derech uv'shochbecha uv'kumecha וקשרתם לאות על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך.
Page 31 in the 6th line from the top.
למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותי, והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים, להיות לכם לאלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אדוני אלוהיכם אמת.
Dr. King concluded his I Have a Dream speech by invoking in his language from his day this inspiring vision on page 4, reading number 3. When we allow freedom to ring, when we let it ring from every city and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, great God Almighty, we are free at last. He imagined celebrating freedom by singing praise to God. Our Israelite ancestors enacted that vision when they crossed through the waters of the Sea of Reeds, the culmination of the Exodus story that begins in the section of the Torah that we read this week. Their song marks not only their redemption from Egyptian bondage, but our hope for the redemption of all people from oppression of every kind. To reach that time, we have to wade in the water. To get there, we can't let anybody or anything turn us around. On page 5, and please note there's a typo in the booklets, the 3rd line of Ain't Gonna Let Nobody Turn Around should be the same as the 1st line.
Ain't gonna let nobody turn me round, turn me round, turn me round. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me round. I'm gonna keep on walking, keep on talking, marching up to freedom land. Ain't gonna let no jail trouble the water. See that house all dressed in white. God's gonna trouble the water. The leader looks like the Israelite. God's gonna trouble the water. Wade in the water. Wade in the water, children. Wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. See that band all dressed in red. God's gonna trouble the water. Looks like the band that Moses led. God's gonna trouble the water. Wade in the water. Wade in the water, children. Wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. Kabocha, Ma'elim Adonai, Kabocha, Edar Bakodesh, Norah Tehilot Osei Melech, Malchutecha, trouble the water. God's gonna trouble the water.
But liberation is incomplete. In January 1963, the National Conference of Christians and Jews sponsored a conference in Chicago entitled Religion and Race. Before Martin Luther King gave the closing speech, Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel gave the opening talk. It was the first time the two men had met. Rabbi Heschel began his speech by noting that the struggle that continues today goes back to biblical times. In fact, to make his point, he quoted from last week's Torah portion. In his language from his day, he said on page 6, number 4, at the first conference on religion and race, the main participants were Pharaoh and Moses. Moses' words were, "Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, let my people go, that they may celebrate a feast to me." While Pharaoh retorted, "Who is the Lord, that I should heed his voice and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, and moreover, I will not let Israel go." The outcome of that summit meeting has not come to an end. Pharaoh is not ready to capitulate. The Exodus began, but is far from having been completed. In fact, it was easier for the children of Israel to cross the Red Sea than for a Negro to cross certain university campuses. So even as we rejoice in as much freedom as we have, we pray for shalom, the completeness, the more extensive freedom that leads to true peace. In the Siddur on page 63, Hashkivenu asks God to shelter us. Page 33. Thank you. Page 33. Hashkivenu asks God to shelter us with shalom. In December of 1967, Martin Luther King gave a Christmas sermon on the topic of peace on earth, goodwill toward men, in which he described what he saw as the necessary preconditions for peace. He said on page 6, number 5, "Now let me suggest first that if we are to have peace on earth, our loyalties must become ecumenical rather than sectional. Our loyalties must transcend our race, our tribe, our class, and our nation. And this means we must develop a world perspective. No individual can live alone. No nation can live alone. And as long as we try, the more we are going to have war in this world. Now the judgment of God is upon us, and we must either learn to live together as brothers, or we are all going to perish together as fools. It really boils down to this, that all life is interrelated. We are all caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied into a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. We are made to live together because of the interrelated structure of reality. We aren't going to have peace on earth until we recognize this basic fact of the interrelated structure of all reality. In the Siddur, page 33, Hashkivein. We come now to the central section of the service, the Amidah, the standing prayer, on page 35. We will begin in a moment by rising together and joining together on page 35, and then we continue individually from there. If you wish to continue with the liturgy of the Siddur, it goes through page 38, or you can look inside yourself for the prayers of your own heart and your own soul. And when you've had as much time as you'd like for your private prayers, you may be seated, but we begin by rising together on page 35b.
Adonai sefataytita ufia giteilatecha. Adonai sefataytita ufia giteilatecha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu Elohei Avotenu Elohei Abraham Elohei Yitzchak Elohei Yaakov Elohei Sarah Elohei I was very inspired when I first learned about the meeting of Martin Luther King and Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. And in particular, when Abraham Joshua Heschel was invited to march with Dr. King in Selma, and the march occurred on Shabbat. And there were some Jewish legal prohibitions against doing such a thing because it would involve doing some things that one doesn't normally do on Shabbat. And although Rabbi Heschel was very, very religious and observant of Jewish law, there was no question in his mind of what the right thing was to do. And he explained it to his friends, saying, I will not be in synagogue that morning, but my legs will be praying. So I wrote this song of that theme. He said, my feet are praying, my feet are praying, marching arm in arm through Selma with Martin Luther King. Abraham Joshua Heschel was his name. My feet are praying. He knew that segregation was the nation's shame. My feet are praying. So when the march to Montgomery was hitting its stride, my feet are praying. And Martin said, walk with me on the front line. He said, my feet are praying. My feet are praying. Marching arm in arm through Selma with Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King called Heschel my rabbi. My feet are praying. Heschel called King a prophet from on high. My feet are praying. He wrote that the prophets brought justice to town. My feet are praying. He was a mystical rabbi with his feet on the ground. He said, my feet are praying. My feet are praying. Marching arm in arm through Selma with Martin Luther King. King and Heschel knew the work wasn't done. Our feet are praying. So now it's up to us to fight for freedom. Our feet are praying. They knew that we have to do more than just talk. Our feet are praying. To heal our world, we have to walk the walk. So now our feet are praying. Our feet are praying. Marching arm in arm through Selma with Martin Luther King. Marching arm in arm through Selma with Martin Luther King.
At this point in our service, we turn our thoughts to our loved ones and friends who are ill, those who are struggling physically or spiritually or emotionally. On the inside back cover of the Siddur, we find our prayer for healing, Mishaberach.
Mishaberach Avotenu Mikor HaBracha Leimotenu. May the source of strength, who blessed the ones before blessing, and let us say, Amen.
As we pray for healing tonight in our Chayei Shalom family, we think particularly of Phyllis Burke, Neil Bornstein, Arthur Campbell, Phyllis Dillon, Jane Dunlap, Valerie Frank, Jennifer Galvin, David Glazer, Michael Gottfried, Carolyn Halunen, Mike Kamens, Cheryl Leahy, Nancy Lewis, Joni Mayer, Nancy Mayer, Linda Morgan, Paul Newfield, Sarah Newfield, Saul Payne, Kimberly Phillips, Gail Rosenberg, Alicia Schreiber, Michael Schreiber, Cindy Sherman, Yonina bat David HaKohen v'Sara, Esther bat Chaim v'Goldi, Fegi bat Shlomo Nisan Halevi, and Gittel bat David. If there's someone for whom you are particularly concerned tonight, someone who is in your prayers this evening, we invite you to say that person's name aloud at this time. We hold all of our friends and loved ones in our hearts.
Misheberak imotenu mekor habracha lavotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say, Amen.
Those of you who come to Shabbat services regularly know that at this point in our service, we usually offer a prayer for Israel. On March 25th, 1968, at the annual conference of the Rabbinical Assembly, the organization of rabbis of conservative Judaism, Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel presented Martin Luther King for a conversation with the attendees. In his remarks that night, Dr. King said, "I think it is necessary to say what is basic and what is needed in the Middle East is peace. Peace for Israel is one thing. Peace for the Arab side of that world is another thing. Peace for Israel means security, and we must stand with all of our might to protect its right to exist, its territorial integrity. I see Israel, and never mind saying it, as one of the great outposts of democracy in the world, and a marvelous example of what can be done, how desert land almost can be transformed into an oasis of brotherhood and democracy. Peace for Israel means security, and that security must be a reality." Although much has changed in the almost 56 years since Dr. King's remarks, his central point remains true. Without security, there is, at best, a truce. True peace, lasting peace, for Israel and for all the inhabitants of the region will only come when there is security, when, in the words of the prophet Micha, everyone shall sit under their vines and their fig trees, and none shall make them afraid. May that time come soon. Amen.
Amen.
And now, it is truly an honor to introduce our guest speaker for this evening. I don't believe that we had ever actually met in person until 45 minutes ago, but I was certainly familiar with her outstanding reputation. Anyone you speak to about her raves about her. So I am delighted to welcome to Temple Chayei Shalom Rabbi Tiferet Birnbaum. She is the Rabbi of Congregational Learning and Programming at Temple Beth Zion in Brookline. She received rabbinic ordination as well as a Master's of Jewish Education from Hebrew College in Newton, and is currently pursuing a doctorate in educational leadership at Lesley University in Cambridge. Rabbi Tiferet formerly served as Senior Rabbi and Education Director at congregations in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and Mount Holly, New Jersey. She is a 2021 Covenant Foundation Pomegranate Prize recipient in recognition of her leadership in Jewish education. Throughout her career, Rabbi Tiferet has had a front seat at the intersection of race, gender, and religion, giving her valuable insights into how different groups of people view the world and their role in it. It's hard to imagine a better teacher that we could have for our shared learning together this evening. And Rabbi Tiferet has also offered to save some time for conversation following her talk. So remember your questions, and we'll get to them soon. Rabbi Tiferet, Brucha Haba'ah, welcome.
Shabbat Shalom. Thank you so much for inviting me into conversation with you tonight. And thank you, Rabbi Ken, for so graciously accommodating. I'm so honored to be learning with you this evening because Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was not just Dr. King, the civil rights leader. He was first and foremost Reverend Dr. King. In King's own words, "In the quiet recesses of my heart, I am fundamentally a clergyman, a Baptist preacher." So what a blessing it is to be able to share some words of Torah on the celebration of his birth and his life. It's a wonderfully fitting tribute. Yehi zecher tzadik livracha. May the memory of the righteous be a blessing to all of us. I love that we always get to recall the life and legacy of Reverend Dr. King during the foundational part of the book of Shemot, when we're reading the beginning of the book of Exodus. We read about Moshe being called into action. He goes to Pharaoh and demands that his people be set free. We read this week about the first 7 of the 10 plagues. And Pharaoh's heart was hardened. And hard things, as we know, are usually heavy. Kabed in Hebrew. In ancient Egypt, the heart was weighed against a feather. And if it was kabed, if it was heavy with sin, that person would not merit the afterlife. So Pharaoh's heart was heavy with his broken promises and heavy with his ego. Moses and Pharaoh go back and forth with plagues and heart hardening for 7 whole plagues. This story is our foundational narrative. Avadim hayinu leparo b'mitzrayim. We were slaves to Pharaoh, or rather, we were enslaved by Pharaoh, which more accurately reflects the power dynamic, in a land not our own. This experience of being oppressed is what drew so many Jews into the civil rights movement in the 1960s. We celebrate the connection that King and Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel had. We were just singing about that so beautifully. And as you mentioned, 60 years later, we're living in different times. So, what does a Jewish observance of Martin Luther King Day ask of us today? Well, I think it begins with looking at our own foundational narrative. When the Israelites got free, they got up and out of Mitzrayim. And I should add, with much wealth, we'll see next week. For Black Americans, it's a different story. Black Americans are still in Mitzrayim, are still in the land of narrowness and oppression. And I would argue it's not just for Black Americans, but anyone not racialized as white. And this reality becomes a challenge for Jews who are racialized as white. And I use this language very intentionally. Race is a creation. It's a value system based on phenotypes, which are natural things, observable characteristics. So when people with power create the systems of value and thereby decide who or what is valued and who or what is not valued, that's where we get race. When Jews began coming here in the late 19th and early 20th century, Jews were Jews. Another immigrant group, along with the Irish, the Italians, other non-Americans. But around the time when Black Americans demanded dignity and equality during the Civil Rights Movement, our cultural melting pot became, quite literally, black and white. And I find this time period so incredibly fascinating. It's the center of my PhD work, and I highly recommend the book Black Power, Jewish Politics by Professor Mark Dollinger, because I could talk about just this topic for the rest of our night. It analyzes how Jews were racialized as white and how they viewed, how Jews racialized as white viewed and how Black Americans viewed and lived through the 1960s with the Black Power movement and the rise of Jewish identity politics. It's a time in American Jewish history that we need to spend so much more time with because I think it has so much to offer the moment that we're living in now. So back to my point. Suddenly, Jews are white, or conditionally white, white on the condition of not rocking the boat too much and pointing out Jewish difference. And that's crazy, right? If this land then is Mitzrayim, is the land of straits and oppression for some people, then becoming white would mean becoming a part of the enterprise of Pharaoh, which is absolutely mind-blowing. And this is not even my idea. I heard this first from my teacher, Rabbi Art Green. He wrote, "Let us remember what a fortunate Jewish generation we are. We live in a very rare moment of history when nowhere in the world are Jews being oppressed by the state for the, quote, crime of being Jews or living out their Judaism. We have the great luxury in our day of not having to see this story through the eyes of a still oppressed people. Yes, there are still anti-Semites in the world, and vigilance remains appropriate. But nowhere do they govern over Jews or tell them what they may or may not do. Indeed, we Jews are undeniably a force in the power establishment that rules over others, both by our relatively high status economically, educationally, etc., in Western countries, especially the United States, and in the state of Israel. This forces us to ask whether we may have switched roles in the Passover story. Could our enslavement be that of being stuck in the role of oppressor?" That's a big question for us that he asks. So a Jewish observance of MLK Day requires us to start here. And I want to pause and say, I realize for some, this might sound like crazy talk. We know there was basically a pogrom in October. There are Israeli hostages still in Gaza. And anti-Semitism is very real and still on the rise in this country and around the world. All of that is true. And we're going to put it in a box for a moment. Not because it's not important and it's not relevant, but the emotions that we feel about it can block us from the insights and the places that we need to get to. And I'll tell you, one time I was in church and the preacher was preaching on a piece of scripture that talked about how the Jews did something. And that's what the text said, the Jews. But I didn't like the emphasis that he was putting on the Jews. And I felt this creeping sensation. And I went into this guy is anti-Semitic mode. And I was ready to walk out of that sanctuary. But then I calmed myself because I remembered I came here to learn. I came into somebody else's house and I realized this is making me uncomfortable, but it's also distracting me from my purpose in this moment, which is to learn and to get to a place. So I put that feeling in a box and I promised to come back to it, and I stayed and I listened. And I had the most amazing insight in that sermon. I learned something from that preacher that I would have missed if I had stopped at my point of feelings. And I think about this all the time, so we will come back to this, but we're going to move a little forward. So a Jewish observance of Martin Luther King Day requires us to consider that perhaps we're no longer the Israelites in this story, but the Egyptians? Yikes. That's a thought that I'm sure raises feelings, but we're putting our feelings in a box for a moment. And it's important to come back to those to understand why. Conflict that we're feeling inside helps us to identify and clarify purpose. Why do I feel the way that I feel? There's something going on here, and it's important that I investigate it. Now, I don't know about you, but I definitely do not want to be Pharaoh or the Egyptians in this story. So the thought of being in the camp of Pharaoh very much scares me. We have seen, for those of you who have read next week's Torah portion, what happens to the Egyptians and to Pharaoh. And I personally don't need that kind of drama in my life. And I am 100% including myself here. You might be thinking, but you're black. And I'm not saying I'm not black. I have a mirror at my house. But as we know, and we just talked about, race is a social construct and a value system. And I grew up in Brookline. I went to private school my whole life. I basically lived in Hillel during college. I spent a lot of time being socialized to a white world. And I didn't have a true understanding of what it meant to be black in America until I moved to Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And for the first time in my life, I saw real poverty and real segregation. And real people who looked like me being treated with no human dignity. And then I understood what happened for Moses. Like Moses, I had left my white socialized palace of Massachusetts and went to see how the world was living. If you've never left Massachusetts, it's not like this. There's a whole country out there, and it's very different. And I realized things like, oh my gosh, I've had all this privilege and access my whole life. And most importantly, I have dignity, and people treat me this way. And I realized, no, everyone needs to be treated this way. And these feel like things that we've been taught and we know, obviously, but I had never in my adult life, I was 30, so I was just really becoming an adult. I had never in my adult life realized in my core what it means to value human life and to treat each other with dignity and to see people living lahefech, living without dignity and being treated as if they really did not matter. So I turn this to you. As my teacher Art pointed out, we're not really the Israelites in the story anymore. We're in a very different place. So the question is, of the other characters in the story, do we want to be Pharaoh and the Egyptians, or do we want to be Moses? Thanks to the King holiday, the Service Act of 1994, or the King Holiday and Service Act of 1994, on the third Monday of every January, we have an opportunity and an obligation to work for Tikkun Olam, bettering our world in honor of Dr. King. Monday is the only federal holiday observed as a national day of service, as we say, a day on and not a day off, to bring us closer to Dr. King's vision of the beloved community. Tikkun Olam is usually translated as repairing the world. And according to my teacher, Rabbi Dr. Jane Kanarak, Tikkun Olam is actually a legal word in our tradition that reflects an understanding that part of the law's purpose is to create a more just society rather than a perfect one. She continues, the focus is not so much on the power of an individual to effect change, but rather on the power of the law to correct systemic injustice. So for Jews, Martin Luther King and this day on which we celebrate him speaks to our concept of tikkun olam, making the world more just. In this lies another challenge for us. Tikkun olam is not easy if we're doing it right. It's certainly not always comfortable. We have to grapple with power dynamics, race, privilege, access, money. That we might be on the Egyptian side of the story. Now, if tikkun olam work was easy, our world would already be just and perfect. We have to face these truths that make us uncomfortable. Sometimes we like to take the easier road and do acts of loving kindness, gemilut chesed, on this day of service. In Deuteronomy it says, tzedek, tzedek, tirdof. Justice, justice you shall pursue. So obviously the question comes up, why does it say justice twice? If it were a comment on the tenacity with which we should pursue justice, the text would say, the Hebrew would say something like, tzedek radof tirdof, right? Justice you shall surely pursue. But that's not what it says. The verse is teaching us that there are two types of justice. Tzedek tachton, which is an earthly, basic righteousness, similar to gemilut chesed, which are acts of loving kindness, and tzedek elyon, an overarching justice, that of tikkun olam. And the Torah teaches us that we need both. That's why it says tzedek twice in the verse. We must pursue them both. And on Martin Luther King Day, we should lean towards pursuing tzedek elyon, that higher, overarching, society-changing justice for equity, because that's what Dr. King stood for, what he lived and died for. So we have to get up out of our comfort zones and maybe even our zip codes and honor his memory with our service. And that's going to look different for different people because we all have different abilities and access points and resources. But we're all working for the betterment of our world and building that beloved community, Dr. King's global vision in which all people can share in the wealth of our planet Earth. So how do we do this work? I say, as an educator, it always starts with asking questions. That's where we go back to those feelings that we're having. Ask questions, seek the answers. Don't run from them. Investigate them. Ask questions about the world around you. Don't run from them. Investigate them. And if you don't like the answers, then find ways to use your privileges and your access to do something. Because if you've got the passion, if you've got the fire in your soul, then you cannot be stopped, just like Moses. And in a moment, we're going to shift after our Q&A. It's like being a rabbi. In a few moments, we'll eventually get to Aleinu. And that's like the core message of this holiday. Aleinu. It's on us. We read here, we just read, this wonderful quote from Dr. King's speech, I have a dream. It's really lovely. He has a dream that one day, little black girls and little black boys will be able to join hands with each other as siblings. That is great. And that's not just going to happen on a wing and a prayer. The people who share in this vision have to make it happen and have to do the work. So I want to leave you with two images of hope based on Dr. King's dream to illustrate how we do this work of making it a reality. The situation in Israel and Palestine right now feels rather hopeless. Our senior rabbi at TBZ just came back, at Temple Beth Zion, she just came back from Israel, and she was meeting with her family, her Israeli family, and was speaking about how absolutely hopeless they feel. And then she went on a mission and met with all of the people who were doing the work. All of the people who are building the relationships on the ground, or who had done the work and built the relationships. So when this crisis came up, they already had the relationships that they could lean on. One of those organizations that I absolutely love is the hand-in-hand schools, Yad B'Yad. If you're unfamiliar with them, they're parents, schools where Israeli children and Palestinian children learn together. Parents have consciously said, if we want peace, we need to live together. We need to raise our children together from the beginning. And in these classrooms, there's two teachers, an Israeli teacher and a Palestinian teacher. They learn in Hebrew, they learn in Arabic. And it's school, so there's potluck dinners, there's back to school nights, there's community. That's the vision. That's the dream. From a young age, these children are learning that this is my equal. Their language is my language. Their teachers are my teachers. That's for Israel. And here in America, I got a phone call from a congregant. My son's class is learning about Judaism, and they want to visit a synagogue. And Rabbi, I know you're so busy, but could we find a way to welcome them? Of course. I dropped everything and planned a 2-hour session for 33rd graders this morning. And they came, and why? Why do I do it? Why does anyone do such a thing? Because I know that that's how we affect change. That's how we fight anti-Semitism on the ground. Right? One of these children, God forbid, one of these children, as they grow older, may run into anti-Semites who are talking about, Jews are this and Jews are that. But one of those children might remember, but wait a second. I remember when I was in 3rd grade, I went to the synagogue and we played ball, and then they gave us candy, and we had grape juice, and everyone was so kind, and we were laughing the whole time. What are you talking about? That's not my experience of Jewish people. Right? And that's how we live the dream. We have to do the work. We find the ways within our abilities to do the work, to create a more just society for all of its inhabitants. So thank you for listening. And we'll shift for a little Q&A. Although I should preface this by saying I have no answers to any of the problems. So
maybe we'll just have Q.
Yes, exactly. We'll wait for Mashiach to bring the
Exactly. Thank you. So much to think about and to absorb and to take in from what you've said, and to really change how we think about our purpose here at our being. So thank you
My pleasure. Thank you.
for that inspiration. Questions? I have a question. All right.
Could you please tell us what's going on in South Africa today?
I have no idea.
Let's stick to questions. Yes, I'd like to keep us on questions on the topic.
And also, I would say this is not going to be a disputation. Does anyone know what a disputation is? Do you know what a disputation is? A disputation is when, back in the Middle Ages, they would cart out a Jew. and place him there and interrogate him and make him respond on behalf of all of the Jewish people. Why don't you believe this? Or what about this? So we're not going to have a disputation. As I said, I don't have any answers, and I only speak for all of the Tiferet Berenbaums in the world.
They're a good group, though.
I know,
So,
I
yeah,
love them.
right.
I pay dues.
Other questions?
You know what my question is? Do you want me to answer? Do you want to answer?
Well,
Are you
what-
asking
what's-
me a question? I don't know what
what's-
your question is.
The question is, what's happening in South Africa?
What, you asked it, Ara.
I just told you, I ran a trip, I ran a project for 30 third graders today. I did not get a chance. And then I drove here and finished these words. I did not even open my email today. Well,
So Ara, I'd rather we do that for conversation at the ONAG instead of here right now, okay? Thanks.
I have a question.
Okay. Either that or you're just going for a little walk, so.
Yeah,
yeah,
a
okay.
little while.
All right.
So, I grew up very close to you. I'm a Newton boy.
okay. Oh yeah, we were just talking.
Yeah, and so is Michael in the back.
Oh,
I'm curious as to what brought you to Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
oh.
And maybe you can tell us about maybe one experience you had, good, bad, or indifferent, that has stuck with you.
Yeah, absolutely. The job is what brought me to Milwaukee. Yeah, it was my first congregation out of rabbinical school. They said, we're looking for someone who can, be a part of our city. And Milwaukee itself is very segregated, and it's like 49% Black American. And like the lines run deep. So they said, we want someone who's gonna be able to play in this sandbox. And I had wonderful times in Milwaukee. The congregation was committed to social justice. And everyone was so warm and welcoming. And I know all synagogues say that. But Milwaukee's really cold. So they really, really were a warm congregation. Come as you are, very comfortable, and the music was amazing. And I'll tell you a little bit about the experience that I spoke about, just what I said, because that really did stick with me. I volunteered at the food pantry because that was a way of showing my face and getting to know people who lived in places that I didn't live in. And it was very starkly drawn along racial lines that, the people who were coming there were mostly African American, and the people who were giving out the food and doing the interviews were mostly, except for me, white. And so there was this power dynamic. And the food pantry opened at I don't remember, let's say it opened at 10. And so people would start coming at 9:30. And the people who ran it were always very concerned with the order. No one's in before this time. Da da da. You have to sit over here. You have to sit behind here. You have to do this. I've told you a number of times. Da da da. And it was just unbelievable to see the power trips that some of these people were on. And I didn't have the language at the time. Like I said, I was just becoming an adult, and this was really this is what's happening here. But if I could go back now, to teach how to do the same thing with dignity, to learn the names of the people. I mean, we had these interviews, so everybody knew their names, but to say, hey, John, how you doing? Hey, how's your kid doing? Oh, you said they were to build that relationship would have totally changed the energy of the space. All of the walls were white. And I remember saying, hey, it'd be cool if we had an art project where we brought in a community artist and we did something around hope, and they were like, no, we can't do that. Okay. But in thinking about those kinds of things, I learned, there's so many ways of creating dignity for people even in and dignity and relationship, even when there's a situation of I'm here to help you, but it's I'm here to help you and lift up your experience, not stand up here and give down to you. So, thank you for asking that.
Joel?
You mentioned in your talk that you had gone to a church service and the reverend was talking about the Jews. And then you said, you were ready to leave, but you did, and it ended up being one of the best experiences. And I don't believe you came back to why that was one of the best experiences in the church.
Oh, yeah, because I got this insight, and it's so funny because as I was writing this, I couldn't remember what the insight is. And I will remember it. It's one of those things, because it comes back every year, that I've integrated into this is just now how I feel and how I think about this. And I remember when I come across it, oh, this is what I learned when I was at the Baptist church. But I don't remember the specifics of it. But it was an understanding of how we basically, some insight of Torah, and I had never thought about it that way before because I had never heard anyone put it like that. And it felt very transformative for me. And also following up with this person, because I had a relationship with this, or I didn't at the time, I wanted to have a relationship with this person and not just run away from the church and never come back. I felt comfortable reaching out on Facebook to say, hey, I want to get to know you a little bit better. Before I put you in the anti-Semitic box, I want to get to know you a little bit better, to understand. And then when we had a relationship, I was able to say, I noticed that you translated this a certain way. But if I had just gone to him, right after services and said, why would you say that like that? He wouldn't owe me anything. But because we had a relationship first, we had trust and safety, we could have a real conversation.
Mike?
I may be going off the boundary just again, but as we're talking about this week's parsha and the next week's parsha, I'm just asking, because I've smart like you, educated, nice, rabbinical people. I think I did pretty well in Hebrew school, but my question is.
And you've taught.
And still learning. When we hear the story about, the big bad Pharaoh and the oppressed Jews and all that stuff, is there anything in our Torah that talks about, how about the Egyptians with that Pharaoh? Were they oppressed as well? Do we know? Do we not know? I don't think you ever hear anything about that. Like God says, they were living in a world of life either. Sure, the monkey mucks probably got it, but like all the other, everything we read today or hear in our world today, the oppressed, the Palestinians, this, that, and the other. There's the people in power that aren't even in the country doing stuff, and these poor people are just getting obliterated. And that's just one example. We can do this worldwide in so many places. But in this case, this question now, do we know anything through our Torah about how the Egyptians were treated?
That's a great question. You aced Hebrew school.
It's not mentioned, right?
Well, there's some things that are mentioned. There's some, we see that the Egyptians get hit with all the plagues.
Absolutely.
Right? So, but what their relationship was like to the Egyptian government, I don't think we do. Not in the Torah.
Can I offer something?
Please.
So I'd say two things in addition to that. So this is one really a key point, right? Is that the Egyptians suffer from Pharaoh's hard-heartedness, right? It's on Pharaoh, and that's true in all kinds of ways today too, right? That innocent people suffer because of the bad decisions that their leaders make. But we know of two other kinds of things about the Egyptians that muddies the water a little bit. One is that the first oppressions of the Israelites, Pharaoh starts talking about the Israelites, but he doesn't do anything. The Egyptians do the bad things to the Israelites first. I have to look it up to remember exactly how it says it, but it says that the Egyptians embittered their lives. It doesn't say Pharaoh did it. It says the Egyptians did it. So that's not your question about how Correct. So that's not your question about how the Egyptians were treated by their government, but it's another shading of the Egyptians' complicity, perhaps, in this. To think about how the Egyptians were treated by their government, we need to go back a little bit further to the end of Genesis. Because when Joseph is still in charge, when Joseph is providing food to all the world, the Torah tells us essentially that the Egyptians run out of money. And so Joseph says, okay, well, bring me your animals, and we'll trade your animals for the food. And so they do that. And then the next year, they have no animals, so they give up their land. Right? So in essence, the Egyptians are enslaved, or at least indentured, even before the Israelites are. Right? And to complicate it even more, and really to your point, it's not Pharaoh who does this, it's Joseph who does it. Right? Joseph indentures the Egyptians to Pharaoh. So it's really muddy, really complicated.
That sounds like a fun series. I want to come learn that.
We're just beginning the Joseph story and Torah study on Saturday morning.
Oh,
so here we
there you go.
Any other questions for Rabbi Tefera? Yes, Gary.
Oh, yeah, Professor Mark Dollinger. Yeah, M-A-R-C. That's a fantastic book. It's called Black Power, Jewish Politics. And it focuses on 1960 to 1970, more or less, the decade of civil rights. Absolutely fascinating because one group thinks this happened and another group thinks this happened. And so we're operating with two different narratives of this time period. And so he did all this research into like what was going on for both of these groups, both in response to each other, but individually. Absolutely fascinating. And I think it sheds a light on especially what's happening right now with Israel. So definitely suggest reading that book.
I have a copy in my office, Gary, if you wanna borrow it. And I'll just say, because you brought him up, 32 years ago when I was a unit head working at the Reform Movement's Camp Swig in Saratoga Springs, California, one of the big men on campus who everybody knew and loved was Moshe Dollinger, which was Mark's super name. So
Yeah.
I have followed him ever since then. So yeah, he's awesome.
I'm trying to bring him through.
Did I see another hand? Rhonda, thanks.
We had a rabbi speak to us before it was one of the first female rabbis. And I'm just curious, as a minority, being female, being Jewish, and being black, have you found difficulties in finding congregations or
That's
being accepted in various congregations?
That's a great question. No, and I worried about that very much. Like my senior year, it's like, oh no, like who's gonna hire me? And then I was the first person to have a job because they called me in February before we were even in placement. It was great. So I went to Milwaukee in February and still took the job, which is a testament to the amazingness of this congregation. I also was with a congregation. I spent time in a congregation that, it's very interesting. How did the president put this? I was trying to invite the congregation into conversation with the population, because the population was just like Milwaukee, the town was like literally half black. And I was like, well, how do we create relationships for change? And the town was very depressed financially and all of this. So it's like, things like, well, we've got a building, we can open it up and do reading after school or all of these things. This is our resource. We can use it in some way. And we were going back and forth about race, and I was like, but I'm a black person. I have to say something. I have feelings about this. And they're like, well, we didn't hire you because you were black. And I was like, yeah, well, I can't separate the two. And leave them. So that was a really interesting way of thinking about, like, oh, you know, there are places that it just highlighted for me the idea of being colorblind. You know how that used to be a good thing. We don't see color. But then when we don't see color, we also don't see oppression and like all the stuff that goes along with living a life in color or a life in anything, right? If we just don't see the people fully as they are. So that really drove that home for me. Like, I need to be in a community that's going to let me fully be who I am. In addition, I have a child who needs to be fully who she is in Jewish community, which is like the most important thing. And it's not either Jewish or a person of color, you know, it's both. So.
Go ahead, Ruthie, and then David is going to have the last question. And then...
Yes.
What was the question?
Were there any Black American congregants that were in my congregation? Yes. And there were people who were there before I came. Yeah.
Did you bring more, not, come and join, if they saw you there, so you were pulling blacks that were here?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, because, you know, I don't know how much you were following, you know, what the scholarship that was coming out post 2020 and people talking about their racialized experiences in Jewish life. You know, to have a person of any sort of any sort of minority in quotes status, yeah, in the United States, like, that is an invitation to say, well, let me check this place out. You know, so it's great to be able to be a beacon for safety in, you know, in the Jewish world for African American people at TBZ.
So I think we'll give David the last question. First, though, I want to apologize to the people on YouTube. I'm realizing that you probably haven't been able to hear the questions that have been asked because you're not in the microphone. I'm realizing I should have been repeating the questions, and I apologize to you for that.
Oprah
So,
would have repeated the
she
questions.
probably would have. I still have a lot to learn. David, go ahead.
I'm thinking about the point that you learned from Rabbi Green about whether or not we are, as Jews, that we're not the Israelites in the story anymore, perhaps we're Pharaoh. And I'm thinking about group identity versus individual identity.
Mm-hmm.
Because no group is monolithic. Jews
For sure.
clearly are not monolithic.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering how you think about that in terms of his comment. I think his comment was talking collectively, but I'm not sure. Do you think he's talking collectively or individually? How do they interplay?
I think he was talking to a specific.
Try to
Oh,
repeat it
yes.
for the
Oh,
YouTubers?
yeah. Okay, I'll try.
All right.
So the question was, in Art's piece about talking about how Jews in this moment are more like the Egyptians of the story than the Israelites. No one is a monolith, and there are lots of different kinds of Jews. So, how do we understand that? Is that okay? All right, that's what I'm responding to. So I think it was written, you know, for a specific audience to a certain type of Jew, right? Like, I don't think if he was in, I don't know, I can't think of an example, but, you know, in a different group of Jews, that message would have necessarily landed. Or maybe it would have, because we're still thinking about, like, who in the group has the power and the privilege and who can do what with what. And we're all encountering different realities. So I think if it lands for you and you're asking the question or you're feeling the feeling, like, that's definitely not me, I can't believe someone would suggest a thing, that's probably the group that he was writing that for, right? But if it's another, if you're feeling like, oh, like, I see that, I understand that, that totally makes sense. How do we change that? How do we shift the narrative, right? Like, so I think for all Jews, it's worth considering, where am I in this story? right? Like, is this still true? I think, the more that or when we don't do that, we risk making that part of it an idol, right? And the part of Torah Chaim is that part of keeping Torah alive and going is that it's reflexive and our meanings and understandings can change. So I think it's important to ask the question, regardless of what kind of Jew you are. Where am I in this story?
I am certainly going to take that with me into Passover this
Yeah.
year,
Oh,
and I think
yeah.
it's another shading of everything that we do at the Seder to put us back in that slavery mindset is because we're not there now. And what part of the story are we in? We're not those slaves.
Mm-hmm.
Are we? Are we Egypt? Are we? Where are we in that? And we have to actively shift our mindset. And so doing all those symbolic foods and all the readings and everything at the Seder is an attempt to yank us into that slavery mindset again,
Yeah.
to be inspired to do the work.
Yeah.
So, thank you.
My
Thank you,
pleasure.
Yeshua.
Thank you.
Thank you very,
Thank
very
you.
much. It is up to us. If we don't do the work doesn't get done. If we don't walk the walk, then the dream stays just a dream and doesn't become a truth. It is up to us, as Rabbi Tiferet says, is how we translate Aleinu. And so we turn back in our Sidurim to page 51, and we rise.
Aleinu l'shabeach l'adon hakol, v'atei kedula v'yotzer b'reshit, shelo asanu k'doyei ha'aratzot, v'lo samanu k'mishtachot ha'adamah, shelo samanu k'ayem, v'goratenu k'kol ha'monot, v'anachnu gorim, u'mishtachavim u'modim, l'fnei melech, machlei ha'mlakim, ha'kadosh baruch hu, shehu zotei shamayim li'yosei haaretz, u'moshavim karov ha'shamayim lima'at, u'shtinatu zo, v'govei meroni, hu Eloheinu Eidod, Elek Mokeinu efezulato, kakatu v'torato, v'natayom b'hashivota elevanecha, ki Adonai hu Elohim, b'shamayim imah, ve'al haaretz mitachal, Eidod, v'ne'emar, v'haya Adonai, l'melech al kol haaretz, v'yom hahu, yeh Adonai echad, u'shemo echad.
Please be seated. As we prepare for Kaddish, we recall the loved ones whom death has recently taken from us, those who died at this season in years past, and those whom we have taken into our hearts with our own. Tonight, our hearts especially go out to Karen Swartz and her family. Their family friend, Stu Morgan, died this past week. We also especially remember Jan Ruderman, cousin of Gary Fraden, and Donald A. Finkel, brother of Marcia Hirsch, for whom we are still in Shloshim, the first 30 days of mourning. And our congregational family remembers with special affection our loved ones whose yahrzeit will occur this coming week. Jacob Arbit, father of Gloria Aronson, Morton Bavarnik, father of Judy Katzen, Arlene Zimmerman, mother of Glenn Zimmerman, Donald Cohen, father of Gail Dichter, Alan D. Weiner, father of Marty Weiner, and my father, David Carr. And we remember as well all of those who were killed on and since October 7th as a result of the Hamas attack on Israel. If you are remembering someone this evening, we invite you to say that person's name aloud now. Zichronam livracha. May the memories of all our dear ones be a blessing. If you're saying Kaddish in someone's memory tonight, we ask you to rise now. In loving support of the mourners, we rise as a congregation. In gratitude to God for the gift of the lives of their loved ones, those who are in mourning and those remembering someone, say Kaddish on page 52. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shmei Rabbah, v'alma divrach hirutei v'yamlich malchutei, b'chayeichon u'v'yomeichon, u'v'chayei dechol beit Yisrael, v'agala u'v'yizman kariv imru amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mevarach le'olam v'l'olmei olmaya, yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh, v'yithadar v'yitalev v'yithalal shmei kudsha b'richu, Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechemata, amiran be'alma v'imru amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya v'chayim, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael, v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael, v'imru amen. May the source of peace send peace to all who mourn, and comfort all of the bereaved. And we say, Amen. Please be seated. Mike is pointing to Scott, so I'm guessing Scott is offering greetings on behalf of our board.
Thank you. Shabbat shalom, everyone. It's great to see such a nice turnout on an evening where we are celebrating together the life of a man who is very important to the world. And I want to thank Rabbi Carr for bringing us such an exciting and passionate guest speaker tonight. It's always great when we have somebody come into our community and educate us and tell us about their perception on things, and it's just been a great service. So. Announcements. So we have Torah study tomorrow, 9 o'clock, with Rabbi Carr. It's in person and it's remote. Mr. Feldman, if you want to come, I will gladly pick you up tomorrow and bring you, because I do go. Havdalah services tomorrow at 6 o'clock online. And join us tomorrow at 10:30 in the morning. Allison Farley, daughter of James and Michelle Farley, will celebrate becoming a bat mitzvah. Wednesday, January 24th at 11 a.m. is the first session of a speaker series presented by Brotherhood and Sisterhood. And our first one is Gary Fraden of the Brotherhood will be speaking on understanding America's obesity and diabetes epidemic and what you can do about it, which sounds interesting. Do you have a college student in your life? Yeah, I'm looking at. Join Sisterhood on Sunday, January 21st at 2 o'clock in the afternoon for a potluck college care package party for TCS parents, grandparents, family, and friends. Join us for the 16th. Oh, this is my event. Okay. Join us for the 16th annual Temple Chai Shalom Team Trivia Night and Potluck Dinner. That is Saturday, January 27th at 7 o'clock. We had a few kinks on our website with our PayPal button, but that is up and running. So sign up, because the event will probably sell out. You can register on the Brotherhood page of the TCS website, and the PayPal link, like I said, is now working. An important reminder, Family Table always needs our help every month. 30 cans of tuna and 30 cans of vegetarian soup. If you would like to donate money to Family Table monthly instead of bringing food, there is a link in your weekly TCS email. Thank you to the Ritual Committee for sponsoring tonight's Oneg, and please remember, information and links to all activities are included in your weekly emails on Mondays, as well as special notices, and you can always call the TC office if you have any other questions. Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you, Scott. I will have to tell Noah Jarofsky that you did a great job with the announcements tonight. And let me offer again my words of gratitude and thanks to Rabbi Tiferet for teaching us tonight. I will say in full disclosure that although, Scott, I appreciate you thanking me for bringing her here, it was actually David and Jerry who knew you well enough to suggest that we bring you in. So I'm grateful to them for making this connection, this shidduch for us tonight. And we're looking forward to you working and teaching our students on Sunday morning as well. All right, so before we sing our final song, I want to share one final thought from Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. I mentioned earlier that he spoke to the Rabbinical Assembly in March of 1968. After Heschel introduced him to the Assembly, Dr. King expressed his appreciation for the opportunity to speak with them, and then he said the following. He said, "Another thing that I would like to mention is that I have heard 'We Shall Overcome' probably more than I have heard any other song over the last few years. It is something of the theme song of our struggle. But tonight was the first time I have ever heard 'We Shall Overcome' in Hebrew. So that too was a beautiful experience for me to hear that great song in Hebrew. And so we conclude our service tonight by singing that great song in both English and Hebrew on the back of the booklets, 'We Shall Overcome.'"
We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe. We shall overcome someday. Underneath the bear, underneath the bear, underneath the bear, Devohayo. We'll walk hand in hand. We'll walk hand in hand. We'll walk hand in hand someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe. We'll walk hand in hand someday. We are not afraid. We are not afraid. We are not afraid today. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe. We're not afraid today. We shall all be free. We shall all be free. We shall all be free someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe. We shall all
Kaddish is on page 49 of the Siddur. While you are turning pages, let me also thank the Kol Shalom Trio for leading us with their music tonight. Thank you so much. Page 49.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'ratzavanu v'shabbat kodsho v'yava uvratzon hinchilanu zikaron lemasei v'reishit Ki hu yom techila lemikra'e kodesh zecher litziat Mitzrayim Ki vanu bacharta ve'otanu kidashta mikol hamim ve'shabbat kodshecha be'ahava uvratzon Inchaltanu, Baruch atah Adonai, Mekadesh HaShabbat.
And as we give thanks to God for the bread, we give thanks as well to everybody who brought food for our oneg, which we are about to enjoy in the multi-purpose room. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamotzi lechem min haaretz.
Amen.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom. Yasher koach.